Hi, everybody. My name is Drew Foster, and I am an autistic person who happens to also be a behavior analyst. So, today I want to talk about the concept of masking, and I want to talk about it from an autistic perspective and a behavior analyst perspective, and then combine those two things and talk about them as an autistic who happens to know a whole lot about behavior analysis. And really look at the psychology of masking and why it is that somebody would or wouldn't do it, or should or shouldn't do it. So, simply put, masking is when you engage in some behaviors or don't engage in others as a way to cover up your neurodiversity. That's the way that people use it in autistic communities and communities built around people with autism, as it's all about hiding your autism. And so that's how we're going to look at it today. Should we engage in masking? Should we teach autistics to mask so that they hide their autism? And the obvious answer to that is going to be no. We should not teach autistic people to hide their autism. So is that it? Is that the end of the video? Just about a minute in? No, I've got some other thoughts on it because it's not a simple black and white answer as much as many autistics would like it to be, because we like things that are black and white. We don't like diving into the gray area. As a hint for my other autistics out there, gray is made up of black and white. You just kind of have to break it down. So I'm going to talk about a little bit more of that black and white and the things that we need to consider that would determine if masking is acceptable in certain situations. And I would argue that it is. I would say that I, as a 32-year-old autistic, still engage in masking in contexts where people know that I'm autistic, and it's not because I want them to not think of me as autistic. It's because of a whole slew of other reasons. So when we think about what behaviors are commonly masked, the two that I would say I mask the most would be stereotypy or stimming, and one of those is physical, another is vocal. So physical stereotypy for me often manifests itself in just stretching my neck and bending it. I really, really like to roll my neck, and I will do it even if there's not any sort of crick in my neck that I need to pop. It just feels comfortable for me to roll my neck. It is a soothing thing to do. And so I will do it occasionally, and just one or two stretches or a quick roll when I'm around other people, but I don't do it constantly, because if I am constantly moving my head and rolling my neck, then the people around me are going to think that something is off, which technically it is, because I am not normal. I am not what they expect from the average person that they run into. But things that are atypical often make people uncomfortable because we are taught to expect certain things. And for me, as an autistic person living in a world surrounded by neurotypicals, I have to decide if it is worth making the people around me uncomfortable by being different. And there are some times that the answer to that is absolutely yes. There are a lot of things that my autism does for me that I think are absolutely wonderful. I am a very straightforward person. I don't lie to people to make them feel better. And I think those are things that are valuable. And those are things that I don't mask. I don't cover those up because I honestly believe that they make everything better. I think that when you don't lie to people, they know that they can believe you. And that means that if you tell them they're doing something well, they have no reason to think that you're lying to them. And if you tell them that a criticism of their job performance is not a criticism of them as a person, they're likely to believe you on that. If you tell a parent, hey, I know you're working really, really hard, but there's this thing I want you to do a little bit differently, they learn to just accept the fact that you're not saying you are a bad parent, that you're just saying, hey, I want you to try doing something a little bit differently in working with your autistic child. And so those are things that I'm not going to cover up, but the physical stereotypy can make people uncomfortable. And so it's something that I say, okay, I'm going to minimize the amount of physical stereotypy that I do around neurotypicals. Um, and the same with vocal stereotypy, because vocal stereotypy is very much a thing in my life. If you had a camera placed in my apartment, you would be shocked at the amount of self-talking that I do, at the conversations that I have with myself, and the accents and voices that I use. Um, and for me, that is a fun, soothing, automatically reinforcing activity. But if you have a conversation with yourself with different voices and accents, people around you tend to think that you're crazy. And they are very uncomfortable. And if you're walking through the aisles of Target and you are having a conversation with yourself with multiple voices and accents, people might not feel safe because they don't know the difference between stereotypy and any other sort of mental condition that might make someone unsafe to be around. And they are more likely going to figure out what they need to do to protect themselves, which is stay away from the crazy person. So even though their perception of me is incorrect, I can't expect everybody who I run into in the grocery store to just identify that I am autistic and not dangerous to them. So I don't engage in those behaviors around those people or in public places, because I live in this community and I want to contribute to it and not make people feel unsafe. So I think that's something that we need to consider is, what is the context of the behaviors that we're talking about masking? What are the behaviors that we're talking about masking? Just like many autistics, I have a very strong sense of justice. When I see something wrong happening, I want to call it out and I want it to stop right away. That's not something I'm going to mask. If I see somebody doing something to hurt someone else, I'm going to call it out. But the way that I do it, I might do it in a way that neurotypicals find to be more acceptable. Instead of me just calling it out and shouting someone down and telling them they're wrong like I used to do, I'm going to behave in a way that they are going to listen to and respect. Because the reality is, shouting someone down doesn't actually work as much as I might want it to. Yelling at someone, telling them they're wrong, tends to really just make them dig their feet in and just stay in their position. So I would say that masking is not inherently good. It is not inherently bad. We don't want to hide our autism, but we still want to respect the fact that we live around other people and we don't want to make them uncomfortable more than is necessary. We also, of course, want to teach other people about autism. We want them to understand and recognize autism when they see it in the community. But we can't expect them to bend over backwards for us, because that's not how the world works. That's not how living in a community works. People give up parts of themselves for the benefit of living around other people. And so I would say that with that in mind, everybody does masking to some extent. If you are completely neurotypical, your mind works in every capacity in the way that at least 51% of the rest of the population works. There is nothing remarkable about your brain. You still probably mask. You probably do things because of the social reinforcers, even though you don't like doing those things. People play games that they don't want to play because their friends want to play those games. They go and they do activities that they don't want to do because the people they care about want to do those things, and they want to do things with the people that they like. And so I would say that masking as an autistic is the same as that. It is trying to figure out what is the most reinforcing to you and making some concessions in the way that you behave so that you can access the things that are most reinforcing. And if what's most reinforcing to you is engaging in constant stereotypy, and you don't care at all about the social relationships and the reinforcers that come with them, then great, just engage in constant stereotypy. But down the road, when those social relationships are important, if they become important, you're probably going to want to change your behaviors so that you don't scare people away and make them uncomfortable. And I'm going to tell you a story about my life that kind of illustrates this point because it's a lesson that I had to learn the hard way. Um, like many people, I was diagnosed relatively young. I was diagnosed 25 years ago, so it wasn't common for autistic diagnoses to occur prior to the age of 2. I was 7 years old when I was diagnosed in the second grade, and at that time it was Asperger's syndrome, which fell under the umbrella of autism spectrum disorder. But now Asperger's syndrome is not a diagnosis, it is just ASD. And so, because that is higher functioning autism, which some people don't like that term, some people do. It's an easily understandable term, so I'm going to continue to use it. Um, there were a lot of things about me that kept me away from that diagnosis when I was very young. Even though I did have some language delays, I had some skill delays. Um, I didn't come across as autistic as readily as kids might now because we know more about autism. And so a lot of my behaviors had been fairly well ingrained by 7 years old. And if you haven't spent time around a 7 year old, you should, because it is amazing how much their personality is already very much a thing. Um, so, anyway, I was the kid that I was, and I had anger issues. If things didn't go the way that I liked, my response was typically to be aggressive and physically aggressive, just to be clear on that. I hit people, I hit other kids, I kicked people, I got in fights over and over and over to the point that I was suspended from school at least once per year, typically multiple times through the seventh grade when I was finally expelled. Now, at that point, I went to a behaviorally challenged school where we had social skills instructions. And the social skills instruction was not just for kids on the autism spectrum like me, it was for everyone who went to that school. And it was the, at the time, 32 worst behaved kids in my school district. So top 32, I'm able to wear that badge of honor that I was one of the top 32. When I finished there, when I moved back into a typical school setting, I went to high school. And in my high school, I was still in some special education classes, primarily a resource class because I was academically proficient, but I received special education benefits and resources because I still needed some. But I still came across to my peers as normal, but weird. And that might sound weird, but I say normal instead of neurotypical because that's not a word that they would have used when I was in high school, which I started high school 18 years ago. I started high school. It's amazing how fast the years go by. So they didn't think of me as neurodivergent. I was just the weird kid. But I was academically proficient, I was physically capable, and so to them, I was just weird. I wasn't disabled. There was no way to them of identifying why I was different. They just knew me as the weird kid. And that led to a lot of social punishers as I tried to get more and more involved in my high school drama program. And that led to conflict because I was trying to participate and be involved, but no one wanted to be my friend. No one wanted to hang out with me. There were a few people that were kind to me because they were kind people, but I wasn't in that inner circle of the drama kids, even though I spent all my nights at rehearsals. I was in every play. I did contests with them. I just couldn't build those meaningful social relationships. And this all came to a head at the end of my sophomore year of high school when there was a major conflict. And that conflict actually resulted in my suspension from the theater program for the next play. My drama teacher pulled me aside and said to me, "You're not allowed to be in the next play because of the way that your social interactions were here." And I'm not going to get into what those were. I behaved inappropriately, but it was also kind of the buildup of the frustration of not being accepted. Um, and I wasn't accepted because they didn't know I was autistic and I wasn't masking. So to them, I was just the weird kid. And so that in this very formative stage of my life at 16 years old, it hurt. And it was a very meaningful hurt. I met this social punisher because I wasn't willing to look at how I was expected to behave and behave in that way. My drama teacher at the time was a very wise man, actually. He encouraged me to tell my classmates about my autism diagnosis. And when they did the wrap up for the play where all this was happening, he actually sat down and talked to the entire cast and crew about my autism diagnosis. It was something that he asked me if he could do, and I said yes. And he explained to them that my mind just doesn't work the same as theirs. And that next school year, when I got back involved with the drama club after my suspension was over, my relationships were different. Some of it was peers being more accepting of the fact that I wasn't the same as them, and some of it was behavioral change on my part, because the drama teacher is pretty straightforward with me, and he said, your behaviors prevent people from wanting to be around you. And I wasn't doing anything bad. I wasn't being mean to people. I just made them uncomfortable to be around. And you can say, well, that's wrong. They shouldn't be uncomfortable just because someone is different than them. But that's how everyone is. And if someone goes into your community and behaves in a way that's different from everyone else, you're probably not going to hang out with them either. And you can moral high road all you want and say, no, we accept everyone. But I'm willing to bet if you look at any of your social communities, any of your professional communities, you try to figure out if someone fits the culture. And if they don't, you try to move them out, or people just ignore them until they leave. Because that's the way that communities work. That's the way that social groups work. There's a give and a take. And so I had to learn how to behave more normal so that I could fit in with this group if I wanted to build meaningful social relationships. And it's something I was able to do over the last couple years that I was in high school. But it took a lot of work. And I had to say, I want to do this work. It is worth it to do this work, to build these relationships, and to not be as autistic as I am all the time. And that was a lesson that I took and generalized from that experience, that it wasn't just the drama club. It was everyone, that I had to say, yes, these are things that I like doing. They are automatically reinforcing to me. I do them because they are fun. But people are going to think I'm weird if I do that around them. And so I'm just not going to do that around them. And so I mask even in the present day, where everyone around me knows about my autism diagnosis, because the reality is I am a 32-year-old professional working in a field with other professionals, and if I act weird, they're not going to want to hang out with me, even though they know what autism is and they provide treatment to kids with autism. They have their idea about how other professionals are. And I've had some conflicts with coworkers, both in my current job and when I was a teacher, because of my personality and the things that I won't hide about my autism. And so I'm even now constantly choosing what of my autism is important for people to see and what's just going to make them uncomfortable. And that's a decision that really I think every autistic person has to make at all times, because anytime you want to build social relationships, there's a give and take. If you want to build social relationships with one person, there's give and take. If you want to build social relationships with 20 people, there's more give and take. Everyone's going to make some kind of concession. And in an area where people don't make concessions, you end up with toxic relationships, or you end up being put out to the edge. So masking is not an autistic thing, and I don't think it's fair to look at it as an autistic thing. And the idea of whether or not we should cover up our autism or hide our autism is not really the question. The question is what parts of our autism are most necessary in a social setting. And if you say, I'm going to unapologetically engage in every single behavior that I want to engage in at all times, people aren't going to want to be your friend. And that's the same for neurotypicals as it is for autistics. So I don't think it is an autistic issue. The next component that I think is important to talk about is whether or not ABA should teach masking. And I would say sort of yes, sort of no. ABA therapy does not teach kids to mask their autism. It doesn't teach kids to hide their autism. But what we do is try to teach people to identify when it is appropriate to engage in a specific behavior. And I don't think it would be fair to the kids that we work with to just say, oh, well, all of your behaviors are okay all the time, because that's who you are. If I have a kid who engages in aggression to get something that he wants, that's not okay. Hurting people is not okay. And I'm going to teach him that it is not okay to engage in aggression to get what you want. I'm not going to say, you should never hurt someone, because the reality is, if someone comes up and tries to grab the kid, I want him to go to town. I want him to hit, kick, bite, do whatever he needs to do to get away from someone trying to take him or cause him harm. But I'm going to teach that you don't hurt people to get what you want. Is that masking? I would say no, because in our society, if you hurt someone, you will get arrested and possibly sent to jail or put in another institution. The same is true of many other behaviors. There might be children, there are children who are more comfortable not wearing clothes. Do we say, well, they're autistic and that's just who they are, so they don't have to wear clothes? No, we don't do that. We can't do that because that would get them arrested. And so if you think, well, we shouldn't teach people to not engage in these behaviors that they enjoy, or we shouldn't teach people to cover up these autistic components, or we shouldn't work on desensitization training. Yes, we should, because we want these people to continue accessing reinforcers when possible. And we want them to behave in a way that doesn't prevent access to reinforcers, that doesn't get them locked up in institutions because they are physically harming others or walking naked down the street. And that's where I think it becomes important to differentiate between what is masking and what is teaching inappropriate behavior. Because you could say anything that I do is something I do because I'm autistic. And the reality is my autism plays a part in my behaviors. It plays a part in every decision that I make for how I'm going to behave. So which of my behaviors are autistic behaviors? Which of them are not autistic behaviors? And there's not an answer to that, because they are all influenced by my autism, just like they are influenced by every other factor in my life, like being raised below the poverty line, like not being below the poverty line now, like being the smelly kid because we didn't have a working shower when I was in high school, and that compounded with the other issues that I had. And so there's all these things that contribute to every single one of our behaviors and every single one of our choices. And it's not masking to decide to not behave in a certain way in a certain context. So ABA does not teach people to mask. But what we do is teach people that there are appropriate times for each behavior that we want to engage in. So hopefully this video has helped you understand a little bit more about masking. Hopefully my story and my experience has laid out a little bit more clearly why it's a gray area and why masking isn't just an autistic thing, and why we wouldn't teach someone to mask, but we're not going to say that they should do what they want all the time. If you have any questions about masking, absolutely feel free to leave a comment below. If you have other subjects you want me to discuss, also leave a comment. I have a list now of subjects that I want to discuss, but I'd gladly move some up if it is highly requested by people. So, everyone, have a great day, and I will see you again next week.